Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Multidimensional MD. I'm Dr. Arlene Diamco, and today I'm going to talk about caffeine and your health and why it's not a one size fits all approach. In the last few weeks, I've been peppered with questions about caffeine for some reason, and I've just noticed so many effects of caffeine on people. And I don't know if that has to do with going back to school or people just feeling more tired, more anxious. But I wanted to kind of tease apart some details about caffeine so you have more understanding about it. And as always, my mission is to bring an intuitive aspect of health back to medicine in practical and tangible ways so that you can access deeper healing and feel more peace, joy, and connection in your everyday lives. So, as I talk about caffeine, I'm going to kind of weave in my own perspectives and what I see from the energy field or what it's doing to your body energetically, not just your energy levels, so that you can have a better understanding of it. So, what I'll go through are the genetic polymorphisms, so variations in caffeine, how you break down caffeine, factors that affect caffeine absorption, metabolism, other factors, the effects of caffeine on your body, what caffeine feels like from an osteopathic perspective to me. So when I'm checking you during an appointment, I can feel the effects of caffeine. And five, how to know if you've had too much caffeine. And six, are there any benefits to caffeine? Seven, what are the recommended limits for caffeine consumption? And what are caffeine sources and amounts so you can compare? And nine, how to cut back on caffeine if you need to. And 10, is caffeine good or bad? So I'll go through all these things relatively quickly. And I know it's a lot, but we will get to it. So, first, there are genetic polymorphisms to the liver enzyme that is responsible for breaking down 95% of caffeine. So that liver enzyme is P450 CYP1A2, and the gene is named after that, CYP1A2. And genetic polymorphism means that your genes can have many morphisms, forms. Your genes can have many different forms. And so we aren't all the same, and we don't all break down caffeine at the same rate. So about 50% of the population are slow caffeine metabolizers. And that means it takes them about 8 to 10 hours to lower caffeine levels by half. That doesn't mean they're out of your system in 8 to 10 hours. That means the amount that you originally consumed is cut in half. There are also fast caffeine metabolizers, and they take about 4 to 6 hours to lower caffeine levels by half. And then regular caffeine metabolizers are somewhere in between that. So after you consume any caffeine, it can take anywhere from 20, 45 minutes to absorb it into the bloodstream, into the body tissues. But that can peak from 15 minutes to 2 hours, and it will cross the blood brain barrier. And we'll talk about more about that. Because, well, caffeine is a stimulant on the central nervous system, and it blocks the receptors for adenosine. Adenosine is an inhibitory neurotransmitter on the central nervous system. So when you block those adenosine receptors, then you can prevent the feeling of being tired and sleepy. So adenosine will help you feel tired and sleepy, and caffeine will block those effects. So there are other factors which can affect caffeine absorption and metabolism. And the more concentrated the caffeine source is, the more pronounced effects. So caffeine powder will be much more potent than, say, chocolate or coffee or caffeine in other food form. So caffeine can be taken like a drug or supplement. And it is, in fact, the most common drug used in the world. And 90% of adults say that they have some kind of caffeine on a regular basis, and the average is about 2 cups of coffee a day. So we're going to go through what safe amounts are. Caffeine in liquid form is absorbed much more quickly because you don't have to break down the food. And if you do take caffeine with fiber, any other fiber in your diet, then that can slow down the absorption. So then there are other things like medications that can interfere with caffeine absorption. If you're on any oral contraceptives, then it will slow the caffeine metabolism down. So you will break down caffeine more slowly, especially during the second half of your menstrual cycle. And alcohol intake can also slow down caffeine metabolism by about 70%. Grapefruit juice, which can interfere with the different liver enzymes, can slow caffeine metabolism down by 30%. And during pregnancy, especially during the third trimester, caffeine can remain in your body much longer for up to 15 hours. So your ability to break down caffeine tends to slow down later on in pregnancy. Smoking, on the other hand, speeds up the breakdown of caffeine. And if you do drink caffeine on a regular basis, it is possible to develop some tolerance to it. Although, if you are really sensitive to caffeine, you're one of those slow metabolizers, it's a bit tricky to do. So, what are the effects of caffeine on the body? So, like I was talking about before, basically caffeine and adenosine. Caffeine is a stimulant. It activates the central nervous system, and adenosine inhibits it. So, adenosine is a depressant on the central nervous system. So, caffeine and adenosine have opposite effects, and caffeine blocks the effects of adenosine by blocking that receptor. So, the caffeine can cross the blood-brain barrier, and in that way, it can help prevent you from being tired, can increase feelings of wakefulness. In small amounts, it can help you focus, but too much can be overstimulating and makes it difficult to concentrate. And even a small amount can disrupt sleep. And whether you are having a hard time falling asleep, or if you do stay asleep, it can interfere with your quality of sleep. And caffeine in extreme amounts, over around 1,200 milligrams, we'll go through amounts in more detail in a bit, can actually be really dangerous and toxic and can cause seizures. Also, in the brain, caffeine can reduce the amount of melatonin produced in your pineal gland. So, there's studies showing that over a lifetime consumption of caffeine, if taken in excess, it can actually reduce the volume of your pineal gland. And your pineal gland helps to regulate your circadian rhythms. It is also your master gland, and it helps to regulate the whole endocrine system. So very important. Caffeine has effects on your cardiovascular system. It can speed up the heart rate. And then on the blood vessels, it actually constricts the blood vessels, so it can increase blood pressure, especially if you are a slow metabolizer. And all of these effects are going to be much more pronounced if you're a slow metabolizer, and that's going to be about half the population. In your lungs, caffeine helps to actually open up the airways. So in a pinch, with kids or adults, if they're having a difficulty breathing with asthma, any wheezing, then that was kind of an old time remedy to have some caffeine to help to open up the airways. On your kidneys, caffeine acts as a mild diuretic, so it makes you pee more. And then on your adrenals, it stimulates adrenals to release adrenaline. But that can leave you with this kind of wired and tired feeling, especially if you're not nourished overall. On the bones, calcium can actually leach calcium from the bones, especially if you don't have adequate calcium intake. And that can happen with if you're drinking more than 1.5 cups of coffee a day. So that's easily done in much of the population. In pregnancy, caffeine can cross the placenta and have some effects there. So talk to your OB about that if you are pregnant. And caffeine is mildly addictive, possibly due to the small release of dopamine that it creates. And dopamine is this feel good neurotransmitter. So Yeah, it can be you can actually get addicted to it very quickly. I remember when I was in Spain, like, years ago, and they had the best espresso, and so me and my dad and my sisters, we would all go and get a shot of espresso every morning. So after a week of doing that, and I went back home, I didn't drink, coffee regularly, my head hurt for about the same amount of time. Like, at least 3 days were really hard, and then it kinda calmed down. And, so yes, it is easy to get addicted to caffeine. So what does caffeine feel like from an osteopathic perspective? Well, um, this is really interesting because when I went to a cranial osteopathic conference and I was feeling really tired, and so at the break, I ate all of these almond butter chocolate snacks. Um, It was like an organic Reese's, but with almond butter that my brother had given me, and I ate a bunch of them because I was just feeling really tired, and then when I went back, my partner said to me, was just kept checking me and couldn't figure out what happened, and so I knew I was like, he was really thrown off by, "What am I feeling in your body that it's completely different than it was 5 minutes ago?" And I said, "Oh, I just had a bunch of chocolate." And he was like, "Oh, okay, got it." So I feel in the body is that it really stimulates the nervous system and it really pushes those sympathetics. So if you take it a lot and you're feeling overworked, overtired, or eating lots of junk food, or not really getting enough nutrition in your diet, and you're having various kinds of caffeine from whatever source, then it can feel like you're pushing the gas pedal without having enough gas in the tank. So it's this kind of artificial energy. And then what the sympathetic nervous system feels like, the sympathetic chain going down your trunk, is it feels like frayed wires to me. So it's like wires that have been like burnt, or if you ever just like looked at wires that are really old, they're frayed and the connections are not quite as smooth. Um, and it's really interesting because then in those cases, people will be feeling more anxious and have some tension. They might be just a bit more whiny or grumpy, or just have like a more of a temper and not be in as good a mood as they usually are in. And so if it's a kid that's coming in, then the parents will bring them in like saying those things. They're just not themselves. They're kind of grumpy and they're being like kind of angry. If it's an adult coming in, then they'll say that they're feeling really anxious, or maybe they're having trouble sleeping because it is keeping them up. And remember, if you're a slow metabolizer and it's taking you 8 to 10 hours to cut that caffeine in half. So if you stop having any caffeine around 2 o'clock, by about 10 p.m., then your levels will be in half, but you'll still have caffeine in your system. So for me, I'm a slow metabolizer, and I find that I really can't have much caffeine after noon, and I really can't have huge amounts. So just a little bit of chocolate. I can't really have like a whole cup of coffee. I used to in medical school and college and residency. Um, but I can't handle that anymore. And I wouldn't be able to have the kind of expanded perceptual abilities I do for the osteopathic treatments if for me, if I had caffeine on a regular basis. Um, I also feel in people that if it feels like the pineal gland is overstimulated, much like the adrenals. The adrenals feel like they're overstimulated, and the pineal gland also feels like they're overstimulated. And then for the pineal gland, it sometimes has a similar feeling as to when people have been binge watching or watching too much TV. So it's your pineal gland again is responsible for your circadian rhythms. It's part of your third eye system, so your intuition. And so when these areas are overstimulated, then you're not having as clear access as to your intuition as you could otherwise. And overall, I feel just more tension in people's body. So along these lines, how do you know if you're sensitive to caffeine or you've had more caffeine than you can tolerate? So over consuming caffeine can cause insomnia, trouble sleeping, jitters, kind of shaky, anxiousness, fast heart rate, upset stomach, nausea, headache, and general feelings of unhappiness or what we call dysphoria. So you can get all of these same feelings with caffeine withdrawal. So it can you can kind of get stuck in this cycle. If you would like to check and see if you're a slow metabolizer, then you could do genetic testing like from 23andMe or Ancestry, and they will tell you. But chances are you can just take a look at your caffeine consumption. And usually people are telling me, well, they don't have much, maybe 1 cup or 2 cups most a day, but they have all these symptoms. And so if you have more than a handful of those symptoms, or you're really having trouble sleeping, then I would consider reducing your caffeine consumption and keeping it just to the morning, or even avoiding it altogether, depending on your health and what's going on with you. Now, on the flip side, are there any benefits to caffeine? So, you'll have more benefits if you are a fast metabolizer than a slow metabolizer, because you won't run into the those negative effects of the caffeine. So there was a study that showed that just a little bit of caffeine, 2 to 4 milligrams, improved athletic performance in a time trial for fast metabolizers, but not slow metabolizers. And 2 to 4 milligrams isn't much. I mean, that's just like a little piece of chocolate. So not even a whole cup of coffee, which would be more like 100 milligrams. But there are other studies showing that there are benefits to foods with caffeine. That includes coffee, chocolate, dark chocolate, matcha. And this is probably more from the antioxidants effect from those food sources, because moderate coffee intake could decrease risk for type 2 diabetes. It possibly could lower risk of dementia and decrease the risk of heart disease, although it also can increase your blood pressure. And it possibly could protect against chronic liver disease. Again, you are more likely to experience these antioxidant benefits from caffeine food sources if you are a fast metabolizer than a slow metabolizer. So they haven't necessarily like teased all of this apart for fast and slow metabolizers. So keep that in mind. So it's not a one size fits all. And if we look at what the recommended amounts are, so average person has 1 to 2 cups of coffee a day. That's anywhere from 100 to 200 milligrams of caffeine. And the USDA and the European Food Safety Agency have similar recommendations for adults. So the upper limit for caffeine consumption in one sitting is 200 milligrams, which is about 2 regular cups of 125 milliliter cups of coffee. And then over the whole day, it's 400 milligrams. So not more than 4, max 5 cups in a 24-hour period. For pregnant women, the European Food Safety Agency says to not go over 200 milligrams. That's 2 cups of coffee a day, or less or none if you're a slow metabolizer. That's my caveat. The US Food and Drug Administration says to talk to your OB about that. So that's not a clear recommendation. It's not completely black and white. There is that gray zone. I would say, from my perspective, you need to know if you are a fast or slow metabolizer, if you're pregnant, so that you can adjust those limits for you. And then for children and adolescents, the FDA has not released any guidelines. The European Food Safety Agency says safe limit is about 3 milligrams per kilogram per day. The American Academy of Pediatrics suggests that children under age 12 not consume any caffeine. And among older children, 12 to 18, teenagers, they shouldn't exceed 100 milligrams of caffeine per day. So that would be one drink, one soda, one coffee. The American Academy of Pediatrics also recommends that teens avoid energy drinks because the caffeine and other potentially harmful additives. Regardless of that, about a third or half of teens will drink energy drinks, and it's really popular for athletes and in sports. And a 16-ounce bottle of Monster Energy drink has about 150 milligrams of caffeine. So that's already going over those limits. And just remembering the effects that it has on the bones, it can leach calcium from the bones and the effect it has on the nervous system. So in the beginning, it can increase focus, attention, energy, but over certain amounts, it increases your risk for anxiety and being overreactive and your ability to focus. So it makes you more confused. And so you really need to know your kid and your family and kind of see like, okay, who's more sensitive to it or not. So, what are caffeine sources? Some I already mentioned. A regular cup of coffee, 8 ounces, has about 100 milligrams of caffeine. Light brew actually has like more than a dark brew. Espresso shot has about 65 milligrams of caffeine. Decaf coffee still has some caffeine, about 2 to 15 milligrams. And if you are really sensitive to caffeine, then you could feel that. And so people that come to see me tend to be really sensitive to things. So I would not be surprised that if you were sensitive to caffeine. That's already half the population. Cold brew coffee, which is usually a 12-ounce serving, can be more caffeine, about 150 milligrams to 240 milligrams. So you're in one sitting, you're already going over the recommended amount. Chocolate or cacao, anything that has chocolate, not just a bar of chocolate, hot chocolate, or smoothie mixes or any drink mixes. 1 ounce of dark chocolate has about 24 milligrams of caffeine, but if the it could have more than that depending on the amount in the drink or the food or supplement. Black tea, a cup of black tea has about 50 milligrams. Green tea has about 30 milligrams. So less, but if you're very sensitive, you'll still feel it. I can't have green tea after 12 noon because I'll feel the effects on my sleep. Matcha powder, which is a powder made out of green tea, ground up green tea leaves, can have more caffeine per serving. It really just depends, anywhere from like 40 to 180 milligrams of caffeine, depending how much matcha is added. Sodas, which are a regular 12-ounce can of soda of cola, could have about 40 milligrams of caffeine. Mountain Dew has about 50 milligrams. Energy drinks, again, can have up to 170 milligrams or more. And then there's other less known sources of caffeine. Guarana has about 4 times the amount of caffeine as coffee beans. It's used in energy drinks and supplements. Can have up to 125 milligrams. Yerba mate, so usually steep like as a tea. So it depends on how strongly you steep it. It can be anywhere from 80 milligrams to 150 milligrams per cup. Cola, which the cola nut, which was which Coca-Cola used to be made from the original formula, but it's not so much more. Has a similar amount as sodas. And caffeine supplements are typically about 200 milligrams. That's 2 cups of brewed coffee a day. But again, it is concentrated, really potent caffeine. So the effects of that are going to be even higher because it'll shoot straight into your body. You'll take it and you'll absorb it right away. So, how do you cut back on caffeine if you need to? There are so many different coffee alternatives. Some have less caffeine, so you can reduce your amount, and some have no caffeine, like Dandy Blend or Jantic Mayan Seed. Both of those I love. And if you do have any coffee, you could mix it half and half and start to reduce down. It's hard to cut out coffee or chocolate right away if you're used to having it every single day because your body will be mildly addicted to it. So, but usually you can go down within a week or so, depending on how much you're taking and if you're a fast or slow metabolizer. So, to sum it up, is coffee good or bad? It's neither. It depends on how you're using it. Coffees, teas, and chocolate also have antioxidants and they can be really delicious. So you can enjoy them sometimes, but it's good to know about yourself. The more you know about yourself, the more you can know how to manage it and know what your limits are. If you are getting overstimulated or feeling nervous, then it's too much. If you're having trouble sleeping, it's too much. But if I've had times when I've been exhausted or where, as a new mom, or staying up late in residency, we have to stay up all night where I don't know if I could have gotten by without just a little bit of caffeine. And that way it felt really good. It helped my mood, it helped my energy levels, and I just had a little bit where I didn't get thrown into being overstimulated. Now I'm no longer used to having to stay up all night every night. I like to get more sleep. I don't need it as much. And so if I have it and don't really need it, then I feel more overstimulated more easily. So, see, it really is situational. It really depends on you and what's going on for you, for your health, and what's going on in your life. And so, um, that is all about caffeine and your health and how it is not a one size fits all approach. If you have any questions on this, let me know. Leave them in the comments. I would always love to hear from you if you'd like to connect with me. Otherwise, you can on Instagram at All Worlds Health, on Facebook, All Worlds Health and Pediatrics. And you can always sign up for my love letters that I send out every Wednesday from my website, allworlds with an S health.com. And a few other announcements. I have a featured article in Venture Inward, which is the members only magazine for Edgar Casey's ARE, the Association for Research and Enlightenment. So if you haven't already, you could go to edgarcayce.org or .com, Edgar Casey, CAYCE. And if you're not a member, membership doesn't cost much. Go in there. You'll be able to read the magazine. It's a great article, 5 pages on grounding your body, your mind, and your spirit, and why that is so important right now. I also have another podcast with Corinne Casey, who's a great granddaughter of Edgar Casey. It's called Creating Calm, Parenting with Mind, Body, Spirit. You can find that on any of the podcasting platforms like Spotify, Apple iTunes, or Google Podcasts. And we are having regular tension trauma release classes. Brooke is teaching, and I'll teach every now and then. The next class is on Saturday, November 4th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time in person. And lastly, we are starting a new series of classes and workshops and videos for osteopathic physicians. So, if you're an osteopathic physician or you know of any cranial osteopaths, other osteopaths, or physicians that might be interested in training to be cranial osteopaths, I help teach the introductory course with the Osteopathic Cranial Academy. And I have co founded this new series called the Dig On series, exploring consciousness through osteopathy with my friend and colleague, Dr. James Gatos. So you can check that out on another playlist on my channel for osteopathic physicians, the Dig On series. So I am so happy that you are here with me today. Thank you so much for joining me. I know that was a lot of information, but I hope that it was useful for me. And oh, okay. So Nomad is asking, what are the two products without caffeine you mentioned? Dandy Blend and Gigantic. I'm going to grab it for you. Give me 1 second. I'm back. Okay. Gigantic, Mayan Seed, and Dandy Blend. Those are my two favorite coffee alternatives. There are other fun ones that have mushroom blends in them that that are also delicious. They tend to have a little bit of caffeine in them, so I like to avoid most caffeine in general, but every now and then I'll have some of that in the morning, especially if I don't have appointments. And it's okay for me to like not have my full perceptual abilities. So, yeah, thanks for joining me. And if anyone has any other questions, just drop it in the comments and I would love to hear from you and I will get back to you. So, lots of love to all of you. I will see you next week, Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And have a beautiful rest of your week. I believe in you and I hope you believe in you too. It's Dr. Arlene Diamco, the Multidimensional MD.